Hello and welcome. So the last time I did one of these, it was for Hassan Piker, who, I had seen clips of him show up on my FYP. I had mostly seen the clips and the thirst traps. If you were on Brat Summer TikTok, you were also on Hassan Piker thirst trap TikTok. The Venn diagram is a circle. But anyway, I wasn't super intimately familiar with his content or his life. When I had made that video, I was like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll subscribe to his stream so I can post a link in the chat and then he'll see it, which I very quickly realized there's a lot of people in this chat. He's probably not going to see it. And I knew he had a lot of followers. I wasn't aware of the whole chat situation. I don't know how streamers do it. But anyway, the reason I bring that up is because today we're going to be looking at Elon Musk's chart. Now, I have not gone out of my way to learn anything about Elon Musk, other than that I have analyzed his natal chart in the context of doing a workshop about astrology for entrepreneurs. But all that is to say, most of what I have learned about Elon Musk's life has been against my will. When I'm doing this chart reading, I'm going to kind of choose to not think about the stuff that I already know about him. I think it's kind of unfair to research someone before doing a birth chart analysis. But all that being said, today I am going to attempt to do a objective, non-biased reading of Elon Musk's natal chart, and also look a little bit into the future to see what is to come for him. So let's get into it. All right. Here we go. The chart's going to go right here. Okay, so looking at this chart, he was born at 7:30 a.m. and you can see that the sun is right above the ascendant. This means he is a diurnal chart. He was born during the day, which means that Jupiter is the main benefic. So when we look at Jupiter, Jupiter is in the 5th house, sitting at 27 degrees Scorpio. Jupiter in this chart is also retrograde. It is also very closely conjunct Neptune, which is also retrograde. So you can see in the chart that Jupiter is making a lot of angles to different things here, but right now I'm going to focus on the fact that Jupiter is at 27 degrees retrograde in what is called the 3rd decan of Scorpio. Jupiter being in Scorpio, Scorpio is a very transformative sign. It is a very powerful sign. And Jupiter expands anything that it touches. So we have this very powerful Jupiter placement, not only very closely conjunct Neptune, which is also retrograde, opposite Saturn, and making an exact sextile angle to Pluto. All of this happening while Jupiter is in the house of creativity, children. How many kids does he have? I don't even know how many. I just know he has a lot of kids. And then being very tightly conjunct Neptune. So if you imagine the transiting chart on this day, Jupiter and Neptune would have been traveling further back into Scorpio, further back into the 5th house on the day that he was born. Neptune represents our ideals, our dreams, not only our dreams when we sleep, but what we aspire to in an ideal world. So immediately you can see the major benefic in this person's chart. It's making all of these angles to what I call the generational placements. And with generational placements, especially Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, not everyone is going to have a very pronounced generational placement. But when the major benefic in someone's chart is making all of these angles to these outer planets, those things tend to be more pronounced in that person's life. And then we see Jupiter is opposite Saturn. This is a hard angle. And this is interesting. I mean, I talked about in Hassan Piker's chart, he had the moon opposite Saturn. Something was opposite Saturn. Saturn is often indicative of the father, and Saturn here is in the 12th house. The 12th house is the house of hidden enemies, the deeper inner psyche, mental health. And one thing I do non-consensually know about Elon Musk's life is that he had a difficult relationship with his father. So Jupiter and Neptune, Jupiter in this very powerful, transformative place in the chart, conjunct Neptune, his ideals, opposite Saturn, the father. Things are starting to kind of make sense here. The picture is coming together. And then with Jupiter being sextile Pluto at 27 degrees Virgo, Pluto is power. Pluto is also transformation. So like I said, these generational placements like Pluto are not always prominent in everyone's chart, unless they're making angles either to personal placements or just other prominent placements in the chart. Jupiter and Pluto are in a sextile. If you look up towards the midheaven is at 28 degrees Aries. So Jupiter and Pluto are making what is called a quincunx angle to the midheaven. Jupiter being the main benefic of the chart, Pluto being power and transformation. The midheaven being the outwardmost facing portion of the chart, the reputation, the legacy. This double quincunx sextile configuration is called a yod, or the finger of God. There are several celebrities and prominent people who have a yod in their chart. One example that a lot of astrologers like to bring up is that Prince had a yod in his chart. And what the yod, or finger of God, denotes in a person's chart is a sort of karmic mission or purpose in their life. This is a very rare configuration. Pluto has to do with transformation. Jupiter expands anything that it touches. It also has to do with wealth. And the midheaven is the reputation and the legacy. I think we can all say that all three of these things are definitely a big part of Elon Musk's life, especially, like I said, Jupiter being in the fifth house having to do with children. So the next thing we're going to look at is, where is the malefic? The malefic in a day chart is Mars. So in this chart, Mars is in Aquarius in the 8th house, sitting at 20 degrees, 5 degrees separating from the North Node. Now, although Mars is the malefic in this chart, if you look over at Venus in Gemini, Mars is trine Venus. That's about, 1 degree applying? Any harmonious angle between Mars and Venus in a chart is beneficial for the native. Not only does it kind of shield them from the negative effects that a malefic might have, but also it gives the person an ability to relate to other people. I mentioned this in my video in Hassan Piker's chart. He actually had Venus conjunct Mars, which is an even more prominent placement than this one, and has different effects. Mars conjunct Venus makes people very likable and makes people gravitate towards that person, whereas Mars trine Venus, it makes the person relatable, maybe not to everyone, but still it gives them a competitive edge, which, I mean, whether you like the guy or not, you can say that that is true about Elon Musk. Because Mars is trine Venus, that means that both of these are in air signs, Mars being the initiator, the aggressor, the go-getter, being in Aquarius, the sign of innovation and forward thinking. Also being in a same sign conjunction as the North Node. His fate, his destiny, his purpose, in the sign of the innovator. I find also that having Mars in Aquarius gives people just this like insane level of determination and excitement about whatever it is that they're going for. And like I said, that same sign conjunction as the North Node, it is just imbuing the North Node, the purpose, the fate, with this excitement, this energy. With Mars and the North Node being in the 8th house, the 8th house has to do with other people's money. It has to do with investments. So as we peel back these layers, the picture is kind of becoming more clear here. All right, so next I'm going to look at the moon. The moon is in Virgo in the 3rd house. Honestly, I mean, Moon in Virgo is not my favorite placement for the moon. It is not in its fall or its detriment. However, I find that people with their moon in Virgo tend to be very self-critical. The moon is our emotional body. It can also represent the mother. And Virgo is a very analytical, practical, but also perfectionist sign. Virgo is a very tightly knit sign. So I like to think of things like this sort of like as a metaphor. The moon is your emotions. It is water. And think of Virgo as like a beautiful, structured, like meticulously woven basket. Even though that basket is meticulously woven, water does not belong in a woven basket. So emotions can be very difficult for people with the moon in Virgo because emotions are not practical. They cannot be perfectly filed into categories the way that Virgo likes to file them. Like I said, the moon in Virgo is not in its detriment. It is not in its fall. However, I've known so many people with the moon in Virgo. They tend to be very self-critical. Sometimes they have critical mothers, and they tend to not necessarily prioritize feeling their emotions. Sometimes they tend to be the types that are like chronically self-aware, almost to the point where it works against them. Capricorn moons, you might relate to this a little bit as well. You can't just analyze your feelings to get rid of them. You have to feel the feelings in order to let them pass through you. And then you have processed them. Anyway, I'm kind of getting more into like, deep psychology and philosophy there, but you get what I'm saying. The other thing about the moon here is that it is actually his ruling celestial body. He is a Cancer rising. So not only placing prominence on the moon here, but also very much placing prominence on the mother. So moon being in the 3rd house, I mean, there's a couple things I want to say here. The 3rd house rules communication, it rules media. So really there is a very deep emotional need to express oneself here, to really explain oneself. So I'm going to kind of go deep into interpretation here, but just follow me. So the 3rd house is in Virgo. The ruler of Virgo is Mercury. Where is Mercury in this chart? In the 1st house, conjunct the ascendant. Mercury rules communication. The ascendant is the identity. So not only do we see this deep emotional need to express oneself, to be heard, for this person to relay their message, but also we see that in relation to the identity. So this is kind of like a double whammy. This person really wants to get their message out there. This person wants to be heard. A really deep-seated need to validate their message. Not only that, but Mercury is quincunx the North Node. The North Node in Aquarius, the fate or destiny in the sign of innovation, making a harsh angle to Mercury, the planet of communication, conjunct the ascendant, the identity. Him purchasing Twitter is like starting to make a lot of sense. All right, so the sun is in a same sign conjunction as the ascendant and Mercury. All of these are in Cancer. Cancer is a water sign, the other water signs being Pisces and Scorpio. Cancer is known as the mother of the zodiac in its highest expression. Cancer can be very emotional, very nurturing, very understanding. But I believe I've said this in other videos, there's always a positive light expression of a sign. And then there is the shadow side. So the shadow side of Cancer, or really any water sign, but especially Cancer, can be moodiness, a tendency to dwell or ruminate, self-pity, withdrawal, passive aggressiveness, and being very manipulative. And this goes for both Cancer and Scorpio, being very manipulative and controlling. I feel like I saw an article or something, maybe there's like a documentary, I don't really know what it is. Something about where his ex-wife was talking about how he was in relationships. And I remember thinking, well, if that ain't a Cancer stellium. So, depending on the person and the rest of their chart, any of these characteristics might be present. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of the natal placements in this chart is that Venus is in Gemini in the 12th house. Having Venus in Gemini just means that you really need to have an intellectual connection with whatever partner you are going to be with. Venus has to do with romance, but it also just has to do with like where we find joy in life. So having this placement in Gemini, a very intellectual sign, means that this person really craves a lot of like mental stimulation. It also might mean, and sorry to any Geminis out there, that they're a little bit restless and sometimes inconsistent. I always say to people who show up in my live streams when they tell me that they're a triple Gemini, oh, that's great. Did you text your best friend back? Did you text your mom back? When was the last time you picked up your phone and texted someone? Because Geminis, I love you guys. You're very smart, but oh my God, stop being flaky. Okay. So let's look at the transits. I'm going to go from the outside in. The first thing I notice about this, of course, is where Pluto is. Pluto is currently sitting at 29 degrees Capricorn, and it is going to be ingressing into his 8th house. The 8th house of other people's money, of investments, also the house of sex, death, taxes, debt. And in about 10 years, it is going to be conjunct his North Node. Now, Pluto transits are not anything to be afraid of. I feel like a lot of people are afraid of Pluto transits just because Pluto has been wreaking havoc on all of our lives since 2008. But Pluto moving into his 8th house, Pluto is power, Pluto is transformation. It is going to transform these investments, these involvements with other people's money. And, at least from what we know right now, that kind of tracks. You know what's really weird that I'm just realizing as I'm looking at this chart right now? The North Node is moving through his 10th house. Remember what I said in my presidential video? Very ironic how people are talking about how Elon Musk is basically our president now. But anyway, let's just look at the transits. Neptune is going to be ingressing into his 10th house in March, which I think is interesting given that he has been given this totally new role in government. So there might be some lack of clarity as to what that means as he's beginning this job. And that Neptune transit, that's a long transit. So although this might be indicative of pursuit of a higher calling, Neptune is also very dreamy, and it also really just blurs boundaries, and it can create confusion. So that will be an interesting transit because that's going to be in his 10th house of career the entire time that he has this role. Uranus is going to be ingressing into his 12th house in July 2025. Now, Uranus is approaching a conjunction with his natal Saturn opposite his natal Jupiter. His natal Saturn is in his 12th house. Uranus is the planet of shocks and surprises. And this is going to be happening in his 12th house of hidden enemies. I think it's safe to say that this administration is under a lot of scrutiny, and this is a very significant transit for him. So around that time, I would not be surprised if some sort of scandal came out, or there was some sort of issue with authority. Something that I'm very interested in is that Mars is going to be going retrograde very soon at 6 degrees Aries, and it is going to be traveling backwards into his first house. This to me denotes some sort of conflict with identity. Also having to retrace steps, and having that be a very frustrating process. Mars retrograde is going to be frustrating for all of us, but the first house is an angular house. the angular houses being the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th. When it is happening in an angular house like this, especially for anyone in the public eye in the 1st or 10th house, this is very frustrating for the person. If I wanted to make a guess about what's going on here, let me look at the exact date. Retrograde Mars is going to be making a square to his midheaven on January 10th. And so there might be some sort of like re-evaluation of what that role that he has been assigned means around that time, plus or minus, a few days. And then the rest of that time that it's traveling through the 1st house is going to kind of be, figuring that out. Some frustrating times. Let's look at the Venus retrograde that's coming up. Okay, well, that's going retrograde through his 10th house. And Venus retrograde is different from Mars or Mercury retrograde. But having this happen in the 10th house, there might be some issues or just some things that are being brought into question at this time. Venus stations retrograde on March 2nd in his 10th house. And then shortly after that, Mercury goes retrograde at 9 degrees Aries. So very close to the same point in the chart. And this is also going to be traveling backwards through his 10th house at the same time that Venus is retrograde. And then, like I said, Neptune enters his 10th house at that time. So I'm just realizing as I'm looking at this chart, that's going to be a very interesting time for Elon Musk. There's just like weird stuff going on here in terms of like his public reputation. Also, guys, I just realized this is during eclipse season. Something is going down. Something is going down mid-March. What's the date of the eclipse? The moon on the eclipse is going to be in his 3rd house. Remember, the 3rd house has to do with communication. It also has to do with news, media. And the sun is going to be in the 9th house. The 9th house has to do with higher education, but it also has to do with foreign travel, immigration, that sort of thing. But also, oh my gosh, consider this a little mini forecast for like everyone. The sun is going to be conjunct Saturn. This is on March 14th, 2025. Actually, let me take a screenshot of this chart. Saturn constricts anything that it touches. And the astrology for him in particular at this time, those transits of Venus and Mercury, those are going to be like really annoying. But this eclipse for everyone, this is going to be an intense eclipse because of the involvement of Saturn. Uranus is also involved in this eclipse. It is making a trine to the moon and a sextile to the sun. This is a pretty wild chart, I'm not going to lie. Mark your calendars March 14th. This is going to be a pivotal eclipse. Saturn has to do with the law and authority. Seeing as that he is in a position of power, I don't know if that means that he represents the law or if the law is being exerted upon him. But either way, it's safe to say this is going to be a pretty crazy date. It also, unrelated to the transits that we can see here, it looks like on his zodiacal releasing on March 3rd, 2025, he is going through a level 3 loosening of the bond period, which will then kind of usher in the next level 2 peak period on April 15th, 2025. So I don't know, Elon. It looks like March is going to be a pretty active month, not just for him, for everyone, but especially in his chart. Okay, I think that's where I'm going to call it for today. If you would like a personal reading from me where I can go through your natal chart and look at all these transits, look at all the placements, and give you an analysis like this, there is a link down below where you can book. Let me know in the comments whose chart you want me to analyze next, and I will see you next time.